You know, I'm pretty basic. I'm a pretty basic girl. I like long walks by the beach, pretending like it's still 2009, and queer representation in animation. Hey, hi, how are you? If anyone was curious how lockdown's going for me, I changed my hair color myself. Let's talk. Let's talk. The fight for queer representation in Western animation has been a long, bloody battle that's only recently been gaining momentum and actual results in a way that we've never seen them before. There are more queer characters now in animation than there ever were for myself growing up, and that's huge. Arthur recently had a gay wedding. Kiba in The Age of Wonder Beast has the sweetest crush scene. The Bravest Knight has two very sweet parents. Shiro exists in all of her glory. And more, like, for one of the few times in my life, I'm using up the whole hand. And that's just recently, like, that's in the last year or two. I really hope so many children out there are able to see these shows and are just having the experience of normalizing themselves and their identities. Internalized oppression is such a dark and toxic thing that haunts many of us throughout our lives that I don't know if we ever really stop unpacking. And so I think that's all the more reason that representation should exist in all forms of media, especially in shows aimed towards kids. I mentioned a lot of smaller instances to acknowledge them, but that's not what I'm going to focus on today. Today I'm going to focus on 4 of the big boys. Some of the most notable or widely discussed ships or shows when it comes to exploring LGBT plus representation in animation. I want to delve in and explore the specific relationships and also their characters in terms of the writing. I want to explore how the character was before they came out and after. We'll talk a bit about queer baiting. We have to, because I believe in a society where straightness is still unfortunately the perceived norm, animation still has to state the character as queer. And especially with the current reputation of networks or shows, there is a default, and that default is to make the queer characters invisible. Like it or not, media influences cognitive perception. Having shows where out of thousands of characters in these alternate fantastical universes where not even one character is queer just normalizes that. Normalizes the erasure of very real queer people, especially for children who may be struggling with their own identities or that of others around them. First, I want to talk about one of the shows that's probably back on everyone's minds, The Legend of Korra. This is the blueprint. You know it's true. You know it's true. When I say the girls and the gays, I mean Korra. I mean Korra and Asai. That's it. That's it. This is one of the messiest, and that's largely because of the intervention of the network Nickelodeon, and to this day, it's one of the ones that gets accused of queerbaiting the most. It seems like the creators were fighting against Nickelodeon on almost every step of the way. Hell, Nickelodeon even wanted to make Korra male because they didn't believe boys would want to watch a show about a girl. Test screenings actually came back ridiculously positive, so thank you for your faith in women, Nickelodeon. The Legend of Korra is the second series following Avatar: The Last Airbender, a show set in a universe where one person, the Avatar, is given the ability to bend all 4 elements: air, water, fire, earth. And there are other people in this universe who are also capable of bending these elements, but there are also people who are not. Both of the shows deal with a lot of big themes, from war, peace, politics, to love, trauma, growing up, adolescence. They literally tackle almost every single fucking thing. Legend of Korra is a more young adult partner to Atla, at least in my opinion. Anyway, somewhere in the middle of book 3 in 2014, the show moved online, which in 2014 was weird as hell. And it also moved to a night slot, which again, for a kid's cartoon, weird as hell, and that affected the ratings massively. And I think consequently that's why a lot of people have a fuzzy understanding of Korra and Korrasami. With the chaos surrounding the show and the very little information given on when it would air, people missed out on a lot of important episodes. And in a time before streaming was the giant thing that it is now, back then it was difficult, and we did not have VPNs the way we do today. I could not go on the Nickelodeon website because it wasn't available in Hong Kong. Hey, hi Nick, how are you? And in a time where as an 8-year-old you probably didn't know how to use Pirate Bay, that meant missing crucial development. Hence the label of queer baiting. Many people have accused the show of baiting, i.e. teasing a queer relationship or a character without really having the intention to follow through. But I disagree with that accusation. Literally the entirety of book 3 is the two of them, Korra and Asami, building the foundation of their friendship. They spend time together and go on multiple solo missions together. Hell, Korra even trusts Asami enough for her to be the one to watch over Korra when she's in her avatar state, which for non-avatar watchers is when Korra is at her most vulnerable, in this state where she's not conscious of the external world anymore. They even get kidnapped together and go through some intense traumatic moments, but that also lay the foundation for a lot of really emotional scenes and emotional conversations. They share so much in these moments and throughout this entire season. The relationship is getting so intense that when Korra gets poisoned and is in critical condition, we see Asami absolutely devastated. And this devastation is only more apparent when it's contrasted with all the other characters in the scene, especially Mako, Korra's ex-boyfriend, also Asami's ex-boyfriend. Avatar, man. Like, this is evidently someone very precious to Asami. And this isn't one-sided either. There's a clear moment for me in book 4 wherein Korra writes to Asami, and only Asami, when Korra's in her retreat. Korra's gone for 3 years, she's healing, and she chooses to write to Asami, and only Asami. Not her not her ex-boyfriend, not Mako, not Bolin. Asami. Because she says Asami is the only one she talks to, and she believes Mako or Bolin wouldn't understand what she had to say. Fellas, is it gay to be in love with your best friend? Then they meet after those 3 years, and Korra blushes at Asami's compliment. Can I make it any more obvious? That's flirting, my dudes. Their emotional foundation that's been building up throughout the last season and into this one is suddenly put forward by the writers as something with the potential for more. And then when they're on a chase in this final season throughout the city, there's a very critical and important scene in which Korra is about to jump on a passing vehicle. Mako in the car tells her not to, but Asami, also in the car, tells her to try. Like Riley J. Dennis said in her video, this shows how much the two trust each other. It shows a beautiful, healthy bond in which your partner is the person encouraging and supporting you, not the one putting you down. It just affirms that the two of them are kind of perfect for each other. And that is so important to see in a queer relationship. And this in the industry is what we call bisexual lighting. They hold hands in a beautiful beam of light in the final moments of the show, stare into each other's eyes, and the music plays in the background, such a tender theme. This is the romantic climax of the show. The relationship does carry on in the comics, but this is all we get on screen. And this scene also gets the most flack. It's a cop-out. They don't kiss and they don't confess, but it's intentionally done to make the scene easier to edit out or get past, which could be said to be problematic in itself. But 2014, overseas censorship, Nickelodeon the network. It's still, however, I believe, not queerbaiting. There's enough intention and subtext. Building up to this moment that I think she gets a pass. To call back to Riley J. Dennis's video again, the hand holding is a callback to earlier in the episode where they attend the wedding and the two characters who are getting married are holding hands in the exact same way. It's also a callback to earlier seasons where we see the same romantic hand holding, and it's not just generic hand holding. It's a very specific positioning that has to be, animated and storyboarded. It's all intentional and it's part of the subtext. And coding those previous moments in their heterosexual context as explicitly romantic and then calling back to those in the korrasami scene. I don't know, fellas, is it kind of gay to hold hands the way they do in the wedding before you travel with your best friend into the spirit realm? Fellas, let me know. And the music itself.
The song at the end of The Last Airbender, when Aang and Katara kiss, is called The Avatar's Love. And in the score for the final scene of The Legend of Korra, even though it's an original song, you can hear bits that are reminiscent of the Avatar's Love in it. The notes are similar, and the instrument used for those notes, a kalimba, isn't used much over the course of the two series, except in these songs. Here's a short clip from the Aang and Katara song. And here's the similar clip from the Korrasami song. You'll also notice that the end of the Korrasami song sounds like a slowed down version of the notes from the Avatar's Love.
Fellas, I could be wrong, but I call that romantic subtext. So there is a significant amount of instances in the show alluding to the romantic relationship. It's subtle, but I think it's still sincere, and that in itself shows a desire that was in place but potentially stifled by the network. I am a firm believer in criticizing a piece of media as a standalone, i.e. outside information or Comic-Con panels shouldn't be necessary to improve the piece of media. If we can't tell your character is gay in the show, but then you tell us on Twitter, spoiler alert, that's half-assed representation. We are so starved. We're so starved of content that we just want to see something that normalizes us. Yes, you can't tell someone is queer explicitly by looking at them. And yes, queer people should never have to signal to themselves or out themselves. But media has not caught up to reality. We want and we need explicit representation. Hence, I can understand why people were upset over this. It felt avoidant. It felt like they didn't want to fully commit. And that's what I also felt when I first saw it. Queer fans of animation have been so used to being teased for views and profits and for positive press, while ultimately being short-handed. But I think upon reviewing Legend of Korra, there was still quite a lot here. We were still ultimately short-handed, but that criticism, in my opinion, should go more towards Nickelodeon than the writers, where I see it mostly being directed. More importantly, but that's arguable, is that the fans' reactions were still really positive. The gays won. We have a beautifully written and storyboarded comic book series as well that begins after that into the spirit realm. That delves into basically everything the creators couldn't, from Korra meeting Asami's parents to them coming out and gushing over each other, and it's just so precious. And they kiss. The girls and the gays stay winning. All in all, it was a big moment for animation. The positive reaction was huge. It was pivotal. And the representation itself was so nuanced. Korra didn't become any less of a hero because she was suddenly queer. And neither did Asami. None of them became any less of the characters they were. They were people first, three-dimensional, and queerness was second. It wasn't necessarily something to be at the helm of perfect queer representation for the queer community. Even one of the co-creators, Brian, admits in his Tumblr post following the episode, back when we used to announce things on Tumblr, was it a slam dunk victory for queer representation? I think it falls short of that. Hopefully, it is a somewhat significant inching forward. And that's how I see The Legend of Korra. It was an important step in the right direction. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't queer-baiting or maliciously intentioned either. In the end, it was a beautiful, healthy friendship that we saw burgeon and be pushed towards something more, counter to a lot of the portrayals we see of sapphic ships, especially when it comes to bi women. Korrasami walked so future gays could run. Well, not run per se, not in 2014 at least, just walk a little faster. Now we're gonna jump to 2018, Steven Universe. If you've been on the internet, you've heard of Steven Universe. You've definitely seen one of the beautiful pastel pastel gift sets or screen caps from the show, some of the songs written by Rebecca Sugar on some corner of the internet, gifs, the references, the fans. You've definitely come across the fans. Steven Universe has been accredited by many for changing the landscape of queer representation for many shows following it. It's a beautiful show about a fictional universe in which the galaxy is run by crystal gems, some of whom been tasked with protecting the Earth. The key moment for Steven Universe that I want to highlight is the wedding between two of the crystal gems who form the fusion garnet called Ruby and Sapphire. Well, they're non-human, but female identifying gems. They're given she, her pronouns, and the event is heralded as a queer wedding, especially when it comes to media who just see hairdress women. In this universe, gems are able to fuse into larger gems which combine the powers, the emotional energies of the two fused gems. And Garnet is the fusion of Ruby and Sapphire. Garnet is how they're introduced to us in the show. And Garnet is this powerful, empathetic, kind guardian figure to Steven, the main character. I really want to take another moment to highlight what strong, pure representation this show has. As I mentioned, Garnet is initially shown to us as a protector, a kind force in Steven's life, but also as someone with their own struggles and personalities and wants. Garnet is this fully fledged, multi-dimensional being, and a lot of that is self-attributed to the love she embodies, being that of Ruby and Sapphire's. Her entire conception is that of two people who love each other so much they can't bear to be apart. And that's important. They're people first, before the sexuality. And what their love manifests through Garnet is kindness and tolerance and a guiding force. Garnet is always the first to help Steven take a breath, empathize, and it's such a plot propeller, to be honest. I think that's such a beautiful message for anyone, be it kids or adults. It's the episode Reunited in 2018 where we get this historical scene following an adorable proposal just slightly before in the show. Rebecca Sugar, the creator of Steven Universe, faced so much criticism from execs, not just in the US but all around the world for this. And it was a fierce fight to get it to air. The show's on Cartoon Network, and in many countries, this scene in the episode was completely censored, or the episode in itself just didn't air. Some even went as far to cancel the show after this point altogether. And this was just 2 years ago. Sugar, alongside her team, made the decision to put Ruby in a dress because a lot of the countries prior to this were dubbing Ruby as a man to make Ruby and Sapphire more appropriate. All in all, the team had exhausted a lot of energy and mental health to a degree on fighting for this. And I think at times it is a bit evident in the quality of the show. Correlation though, not causation. However, many other people in the industry since have credited the work of Sugar and her team for making the fight for representation more possible than it ever was before. Since then, we've also learned more about other characters such as Pearl's relationship with Rose, very romantically coded, and we've also got non-binary representation in the fusion between Connie and Stevonnie. I genuinely, heavily believe these would not be possible without queer people in the writer's room first and foremost. Writer's room, storyboarding, animation production, all of that. The creator herself. And the representation is this nuanced because it's coming from the community it's representing. And as Sugar has said multiple times, by including LGBTQIA content and characters in G-rated entertainment for kids, you tell kids when they're young that they belong in this world. You can't not tell them that. There can't be only a certain group of kids that gets told someone will love you by all the entertainment they see. It's just so unfair. By the time I reached 2016, I felt the weight of it so powerfully I would have risked everything just to get to say this to you now in this moment. And so, again, Steven Universe, while not perfect by any means, was another really important step in the right direction. And now we take it to another show in 2018, Voltron. So this is the bad place. Peace was never an option. This is the worst timeline. Some other generic, the representation we wanted but really did not deserve. We deserved so much more. Voltron was a show by DreamWorks, released by Netflix as a Netflix original. And it was a very special show for me. Very special. It's still one of my favorite shows, largely because of the characters and the way they exist in my head rent-free. Actually, only because of the characters. Since, as many of you who've been on the internet may know, shit got kind of bad in 2018. Shit got fucked. Voltron was a reboot of the 80s classic Voltron, Defender of the Universe. It was based on the same rough themes. War in space, 5 paladins of this giant animatronic cat defender, transformer-esque robot. These 5 mecha cats form one big boy. Pilots being color-coded with the ships, you know, basic, sexy 80s anime stuff. But it was also really different. The paladins themselves being more ethnically diverse, a bit younger, I'm pretty sure. Overall, modernized and more interesting in the character designs. I think the character designs are really good. And they also didn't kill off one of the main characters like the original 80s animation did, but we're not going to talk about that. Actually, we are, because it's about that. Yeah. It had so much potential. So much potential. All the foundation was there. The characters were funny and interesting, and the humor to this day still makes me laugh, but a lot of things make me laugh. The internet fucked up my humor. But when I rewatch it to this day, I still enjoy it so much. The fight choreography and the overall animation is so lovely. So Voltron by DreamWorks, released by Netflix, aired between 2016 to its last season, the 8th season in 2018. It got extremely popular in that time, mind you. I think one of the ships in Voltron is still the most popular fanfic ever on Archive of Our Own. Like, ever? Okay, I lied. It's like the 8th most popular ship. Delusional. I may be. That's still pretty big for a show that just came out in like 2016. I think the issues started arising somewhere around season 2 or late 2016, 2017. As happens in many fandoms, the ships, i.e. the romantic pairings in the fandom supported by, i.e. the romantic pairings the fandom supports, became quite a loud part of VLD's presence online. This was mainly around the main paladins, with ships like Clance for Keith and Lance, Shalora for Shiro and Allura, and Lance and Allura. I don't remember the ship name, sorry. And Sheath, Shiro and Keith. I'm not going to go into too much more detail about them because only one of them ever became canon, which I guess makes sense. But it was handled so poorly that it just upsets me. Nonetheless, the fandom became extremely ship-focused, and this affected a lot of Comic-Cons and panels and general interactions with the cast and creators. What was more pervasive was that the ships getting the most traction were the queer ships, which, interesting, and I have made a video speculating why fandoms obsess over queer ships prior to this. Take a watch, take a gander. A lot of the vocal support behind these queer ships came from a place of wanting more queer representation on the show. Lance is bi became a really big thing at this time, with a lot of queer people seeing themselves in the way Lance idolized Shiro, for example, or fixated on Keith, whilst also being really fucking into Allura and other women. Or even in the way the show would sometimes subtly color code him in the background. I'll link a lovely piece interviewing a lot of people about why they headcanon, because it was never confirmed, Lance and other characters in the show as queer. A lot of the people interviewed are adults, and they get criticized a lot for expecting these things from a kid's show, but I think that's the point. A lot of queer adults never got any visibility in media in their childhood. Childhoods were often traumatic and full of fear for a lot of people, which is why in adulthood we often go back to children's media to relive the wonder and fantasy of shows we didn't get to. LGBTQIA+ was treated as too adult for kids for the longest time, or as a joke, or as a temporary phase in our lives. So I don't think it's bad for adults to want better for kids now, or to see themselves in characters that emulate their behavior. The characters in the show are above 18, a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them. They're adults, just food for thought. The creators say they were ultimately limited by the scope of what the network would allow for a children's show, which I do believe. Apparently they had Shiro as gay since episode 1, but there are suggestions that DreamWorks didn't want the show to get cancelled, so the creators had to wait till later. I will give the benefit of the doubt to them because this is echoed by a lot of other creators in DreamWorks, and it's believable. So instead, I will focus on the representation they did manage to serve instead of the representation they could have but didn't. The whole 2 minutes of it. However, the creators did sort of cave. I don't know what motivated it because it's clear that it was not intended from the start. But in 2018, before season 7, the creators confirmed at San Diego Comic-Con that Shiro, the leader of the Paladins, was gay. This was kind of amazing. He'd probably been one of the strongest characters up to this point in terms of his ability and in the way he led the team and how the other characters trusted him, how the whole fucking universe trusted him. It was a type of rep for MLM that was genuinely historic, proof that you weren't less of a man or a leader because of your sexuality. It was also confirmed that he was in a committed relationship before he went to space. And this is where things derail a bit. We saw Shiro's significant other for 2 scenes. One where he fights with Shiro and one where he dies. Needless to say, fans were upset. Heartbroken. This guy was in the trailer. We'd been led to believe we would get to see something. We've been promised revolutionary rap, only to have another queer character killed off in the name of adding stakes to Shiro's story to give him a reason to be invested in the battle. As if, I don't know, the future of humanity wasn't reason enough. To quote Lamarisu, in the past, LGBT plus representation often had to end in death or tragedy to slip past censors. A lot of lesbian pulp literature ends with this to show a return to normalcy. However, we're past the point in time where this needs to happen, and to have tragic LGBT characters is not progressive, but rather stagnant and even more regressive. You may have heard this type of trope referred to in the past as kill your gays because it happens enough for it to be a trope. And the thing is, right, in a world where queer representation is so sparse and short-lived, good representation and bad representation don't always get balanced out. A traumatic queer relationship can easily become the blanket rep because there's just so little to balance it out. Shiro could have been confirmed as gay without needing to see his partner die. I believe, at least. I mean, after all, what does it say when your queer character is the only one without a happy ending? I know in season 8, Shiro got to get married. Very nicely squished into that weird montage at the end there. But in my opinion, the damage had already been done. This was a show where Keith found his mother. Oh, spoilers. Spoilers! I'll tag it at the start, maybe. I don't fucking know. Spoilers! This is a show where Keith found his mother after, like, fucking her being gone for his entire life and also her being an alien, by the way. Yeah. He just runs into her in space. Like, he finds her? She could have been dead this whole time because there was a war going on in space and she was part of the resistance. He just finds her? And Allura and Korra, who thought they were the last surviving members of their entire species, very conveniently find more members of their species in around season 6, season 7. I don't remember anymore. I've compartmentalized the trauma. Lance found his sister when he returned to Earth after thinking she was dead. Pidge found her brother and her father after they got lost in space. Punk didn't really get a character arc until season 7. Yet, unlike the others, at the end of the season, Shiro gets no mention of his family, job, any aspirations, any thematic conclusion. How insulting. He becomes narratively isolated. This isn't the representation that queer people deserve. It felt like the writers gave up on him. He lost his strength, he lost his leadership, his screen time to a degree. There's a fantastic article about this that I'll link below. Really worthwhile read, really quick read as well. So fans felt a little baited, both in terms of Shiro's poorly handled orientation and with other ships like Clant in the show. Even I felt insulted in the finale with Allura. I think seeing the contrast with Shiro and his love interests and Lance and Allura made me realize that maybe the show wasn't intending on butchering Shiro. They were just kind of shit at writing romance in general. Allura and Lance could have been done well. I didn't want to see it. but it could have been done well, but it was handled in such a disingenuous way to both their characters. The reaction was horrible. I think if not for Shiro, which we'll talk about next, and the positive reaction it got, VLD could have easily thrown every executive off of queer representation for years to come. Fans were literally ready to boycott. Some had even gone as far as to headcanon their own show and their own versions of Lance and Keith to be in a cyberpunk future. It's under the tag name Leo Kira for Leo and Akira. It's actually really cool. There are lots of fics and things written about it as well. Amazing fan art. The VLD fandom, in my opinion, has some of the best fan art. Take a look. And so now I'm bringing us to 2020 with Shira, the Princess of Power. Shira 2020, the pinnacle, beautiful, flawless, warms my little heart. Shira is another work by DreamWorks and another reboot of a classic show from the 80s as well. The reboot centers around Adora, the current Shira, a protector of the world. Their world is currently threatened by an organization called the Horde, and Shira, alongside the other princesses, are fighting to save their world. It's a show that explores the conflicts of faith, identity, and learning to trust in both yourself and your friends and community, about inner and communal strength. Oh my, this show gives me so much hope. We have not one, not two, three explicit queer relationships, the most notable being that of the two main characters, Adora and Catradora. Creator Noelle Stevenson explains that this was another hard fight. When she started pitching the show in 2014, she knew it would not be easy, which is again why we got the recurrence of the final kiss, i.e. only really getting a kiss or confession or that type of thing in the last episode of the show. But there was a lot of improvement, build up, and development of the relationship between Catra and Adora that made it work so well and made it feel natural and normal instead of forced or half-assed. They were two childhood friends on opposing sides of the war, dealing with not only their own place in the world, but their feelings for each other. They were the classic us against the world, until the world got too dark for them to be able to ignore. I love them. I don't have much to say here because I don't have much to criticize. The queer relationships were depicted as real and honest and sincere and healthy. Things that we don't even get to see in most straight relationships on TV. A few people at the start believed the show was tipping into queer-basing territory, but I think that's largely because the creative team wanted to build enough ground, enough proof, as Noelle has said, for a relationship to exist and be positively received before they risked it. To quote, "My big fear was that I would show my hand too early and get told very definitively that I was not allowed to do this," she said. "I sort of had a plan, and it was like, if I can get them to this place where the relationship and that romance is central to the plot and it can't be removed, can't be noted out, or it can't be something that's cut later, then they'll have to let me do it." Because it's a risk, unfortunately, especially after seeing it go so wrong in shows like Voltron. And I'm not that mad about it either. It allowed for a more complex and nuanced relationship between Catra and Adora, one with so much emotional pull and weight. It's honestly one of my favorite depictions of romance in general, regardless of orientation, because it's treated with so much respect and allowed to really flourish. Near the end, there's no doubt in my mind that the two of them kind of belong together. Like, whether you believe in soulmates or not, there's something so beautiful about seeing two characters support and balance each other out so well. It leaves no room for hetero coding, straight washing, whatever you want to call it, or editing, manipulating the depiction of them. Not only is the show a testament towards the character growth, not only is the show a fantastic testament towards character growth for children, but it also really emphasizes the message that queer people can be happy, which again didn't feel like a message cartoons wanted to give to children. The reaction was naturally super positive, and I really hope more networks take this into account. Stride. I think networks have been seeing the benefits profits of including queer representation in the shows as of late, but I've been too afraid of the reactions from other countries and potential forfeit of profit, which is why I think queerbaiting often occurs. I hope the success of Shiro puts an end, or at least a step towards the end to this, and brings forward a new wave of creative freedom and normalizing queer stories in children's media. I used to get really bitter over finale kisses or Comic-Con panel announcements regarding a character's sexuality or the queer ships or whatever, but in doing my reading for this video and watching a lot of other opinion pieces on YouTube, I think I've changed my mind quite a bit. A lot of creators push and push and push, but unfortunately, representation often takes a backseat to profit for networks, and that's why we often end up being in short scenes or corners of episodes where we can be quickly edited out or included so far down the line that surely the show can't be cancelled now, right? I think all in all, we shouldn't stop pushing creators for change, but we should definitely put more emphasis into redirecting some of that energy towards the networks themselves, especially Disney. Oh my god, Disney. Disney is constantly giving us the bare minimum representation. Meanwhile, DreamWorks have completely rebranded and pioneered forward. Doesn't erase some of their shit in the past, but it's a really positive step forward. Literally none of these works would have come to fruition without the hard work of the creators advocating tirelessly for queer representation behind them. And a large part of that is because many of them in the writers' room, animation room, storyboarding, production, all of that were queer themselves. Rebecca Sugar, Noelle Stevenson, and many others on the team knew how important shows like this would have been to them as children, and hence made them for us. This is why I believe diversity on screen should always come hand in hand with diversity behind the screen. Get more of us in there, DreamWorks, Disney, Cartoon Network. Keep scrutinizing networks. LGBTQIA+ themes are still considered largely adult and inappropriate for children, and consequently children grow up isolated to a very real part of the world, a very real part of themselves in some cases. Rebecca Sugar said to Entertainment Weekly, "It's really interesting because the fantasy part can get through just fine. These concepts which are so human, that's the part that was difficult to include, and I think that is so strange. That in fantasy, these simple, real human experiences, that there would be any reason not to include them. And now we can, which is just so exciting. The future is optimistic, but only if we maintain momentum. Stay vibing, stay thriving, like, comment, subscribe, because capitalism." Okay, thanks, bye. Hey, hi, how are you? 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 Hey, hi, how are you?